Hello, sir. Good evening, sir.
Yeah. Hi. Good evening.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome our chief guest on behalf of the PG and Research Department of English, Bishop Weber College. We are indeed fortunate to have Dr. Abdul Muhammad Ali with us again for the third day of the faculty development program conducted by the Department of English, Bishop Weber College. Sir, it was a treat listening to you on the first day on the topic crypt horror, and today we are excited as ever to listen to your lecture on the perspectives on waste theory. We also welcome all the participants for today's session. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. So the second day for me, and from crypt horror, we are moving to waste theory. I was just discussing this with some of my students, and they were kind of asking me, why are you talking only about these kind of stuff, sir? I mean, first it was crypt and now it's waste. I think the very mention of that word waste brings up something very undesirable for us. Something very nasty and something very nauseating. But welcome to the real world. I think theory today does not concentrate on the aesthetics of beauty. Like, we always used to define literature as something that was, about aesthetics and about something that was very beautiful, very romantic. But I guess things have changed, and very rightly so, if you ask me, because we need to understand what exactly are we doing with the world. So with that kind of a dire warning beforehand, I plunge into this particular topic, which I believe is very, very important, very pertinent. So as we began, the first session on crypt horror, let's begin with the basics, and let's try to define what exactly do we mean by this term waste. I think waste, again, is something that is very negative, something which we think is very passive, something out of the realm of our senses. That is how we would like to look at this, this whole idea of what we call waste. So throughout the ages, this word waste has had so many different connotations, so many different meanings. Not just the nasty one, there are so many other meanings, right? So for example, when we use this word waste, we mean that anything that is no longer of any utility for us, something that has lost its purpose for, let's say, humankind. So anything that is purposeless, anything that has no use for us, we call it waste. Or if there is, for example, the wasteland, so if there is something that is barren or empty or desolate, we would like to see it as, a waste. So in other words, desolation or purposelessness, uselessness, or pointlessness is something that we would call a waste. But the funny thing about the language is that on one hand, if these are what we call waste, anything void is waste, we also use the word waste when we talk about anything that is in surplus or in excess. So when there is too much of food, we call it waste. When there is surplus of anything, we call it waste. I think it's a kind of a paradox, because we look at waste both in the sense of nothing and also in the sense of everything. And if you ask me from a very philosophical point of view, or in a very existential dimension probably, you would also define waste as something that is void of meaning. So if it is meaninglessness also, for a logical mind, for a reasoning mind, they would say that it's a waste. Anything immoral is waste. And of course, going back to what we find nauseating, anything scatological is also considered to be waste. So waste, in a sense, can encompass so many different dimensions, so many different interpretations, so many different definitions. So many different images can be conjured up in front of us when we use this word waste. Are we okay here? Because I need to go on and ask you another question. The question of why. If we have defined what is what, we also need to answer this question, because what is that? Why is that? Okay, so have that in your mind, have some, rationality for that in your mind, because this very word waste, from our perspective, also has to necessarily bring out something very uncomfortable, and that is the visibility of the invisible. Waste theorists, they say that we are surrounded by filth. The filth is so much that in a very short period of time, we are going to be finding this problem unsurmountable. Waste is everywhere. Now, when I use this term, waste is everywhere, I mean the waste that we have created out of our actions. Again, though it is everywhere, we never like to talk about it. Remember, I started this session with saying that probably this is going to make you very uncomfortable. This is going to freak you out, creep you out, because we are going to talk about waste. I know for a fact that a lot of people were hesitant to attend this particular lecture because they knew that, okay, Dr. Jinnah is going to talk about certain factors, certain things which probably might not be, flowery or euphemistic. That's because we would rather avoid this topic. As they say, it's out of sight and therefore out of mind. Something that we sweep under the carpet or outside our house. But my dear friends, it's neither out of sight nor is it out of mind. In a genteel society, in a very sophisticated, society, we would rather not talk about it. So it's definitely outside our house, outside the realm of our discussions throughout the ages. It's not that it's only our problem, the problem of our age. Throughout the ages, this has always been. So let me give you a very interesting example, because the Thames, if you have had any discussion of the wasteland, Eliot's poem, probably, they would always juxtapose the Thames of Eliot's wasteland with the Spenserian waste. I'm sorry, the Spenserian Thames, right? Epithalamian. And they would say, when he uses that term, sweet Thames, they would say that, during his age, the Thames was so clean, the Thames was so pure. But through the passage of time, the Thames becomes polluted, it becomes poisoned, and that is exactly where T.S. Eliot situates the Thames, right? My dear friend, it's not so. the Thames was equally polluted during the during the Elizabethan age. In fact, they had a huge problem because they did not know where to throw away the filth. I mean, every kind of filth. So the Thames was the convenient point in which it could be thrown away, as I said, out of sight and out of mind. But in a few years, the Thames was clogged. Now, you can always ask me why Spencer does not talk about that, because Spencer did not want to talk about that. As a courtier, as a poet of the genteel society, the sophisticated society, Spencer felt that it was not his due to talk about it. Ergo, you have the Thames, which in your perception, coming through that particular text, that literary text, you get the assumption that, okay, Thames was once pure, but it becomes polluted during the modern society with the rise of industrialization. No. So as I said, waste has always been a problem throughout history. Waste theories, advocates of waste studies, they always use a lot of pun. So just like Louis Montrose talking about the historicity of text and the textuality of history, these people also like to, kind of bring out that confluence between waste and history. And they ask this question, where is the history of waste? Foucault wrote about a lot of histories, little histories, alternate histories. Hayden White brings out a lot of histories, but I do not think that there is any mainstream philosopher who has actually done a case study of the history of waste. So where is that history of waste? And where are the examples of the wastes of history? I'm not saying history is a waste. I'm saying, where are the examples of the wastes of history? Surprisingly, history is very silent about that. So in a sense, if you're trying to trace the history of waste, it's definitely going to be a new historicist study. Because you're channeling your research through the resonance of something that has not been discussed much. Because we don't like to discuss it. As I said, out of sight, out of mind, out of textuality, out of historicity. And therefore, we think that, we are the people who have done this. No. We might have accelerated the process of turning the world into filth. But we cannot be the only people to whom the finger of accusation has to be pointed out. That's the point that I'm trying to make. So, my dear friends, waste actually implicates history. It's always been there. But the awareness is more today. So what are we going to do about it? And that is exactly where this concept of waste studies comes. Waste studies is obviously a part of that larger term that we call eco studies or eco criticism. One of them. Probably a very sidelined member of eco studies. But if we are talking about the human interaction with nature, with the world, and if that is going to be the nomenclature in which eco studies is going to fit itself, then definitely waste studies is also one of them. The human interaction with the world of nature. So one of those people, one of the theorists, she comes up with a very interesting insight. That's Kate Soper. She says all animals excrete, obviously, but only humans create waste. So if you see yourself as the center of the world, if you are an Anthropocene, then remember We are the cause for this. I think that is where exactly waste studies or discard studies, as it is, euphemistically called, that assumes center stage. Because it's us. We are the creators of this. So it's us. And the entire paradox, it works in so many different paradoxes. And the entire paradox is that the more you try to make yourself and your surroundings clean, the more filthy and the more dirty you're making all those spaces outside your door or outside your compound wall or outside, let's say, your line of vision. That's what I would call the hypocrisy of cleanliness. We will discuss this in much more detail in the forthcoming slides, but I need you to have a general understanding about this. And another very important social philosopher who has talked about a lot of things, especially the concept of modernity, that is Zygmunt Bauman, has also contributed something on waste studies. It's a phenomenal book. The name of the book is Wasted Lives, Modernity and Its Outcasts. It's a book that you definitely need to read if you want to have some semblance of understanding about waste studies. Now, he has come up with a very interesting proposition. He says that the history of knowledge is also the history of waste disposable sets. Now, what exactly does he mean by that? What is knowledge is a question that Zygmunt Bauman is asking us initially. And he says knowledge is the discernity to choose. So knowledge is the awareness that you have to choose something that is good for you, or choose something which you assume is pertinent for you. But in this act of choice, what you do is you choose something, but at the same time you discard something else. So in the process of choosing is also a process of discarding. So when you discard something, what you're doing is effectively creating waste. Now this waste is both literary as a metaphor and also literal as an actual object which is in front of you. That I think is something we need to ponder over, we need to contemplate, we need to understand, because waste is not something that, as we think, is non-concrete. No, it's something very, very concrete. And the history of humanity has always been a history of disposal, aka waste. When we take something, we are also in the same action of taking, we are discarding something. You buy a strip of medicine, you discard. You buy a book, a repository of knowledge, you discard the wrapper. Today everyone talks about zero waste policy, zero tolerance policy for waste. But sometimes it is just something on the superficial. You buy a pack, something from Amazon, it comes in 2 or 3 levels of packing. So just imagine you buy something which might be very minuscule, but the amount of waste that is kind of created is immense. You talk about greenwashing today, right? I mean, everyone talks about greenwashing and conservation, but most of the time, this whole concept of greenwashing and zero waste and everything is simply a sham. As I said, it's mostly on paper, on theory. In reality, it doesn't really work that way. So, of course, I'm indicting our consumerist policies, obviously, and I'm not absorbing myself from that. I myself am also producing a lot of that waste. Okay. So neither can you. Neither can you. But the understanding factor comes first. We need to understand exactly how much we are spoiling nature or spoiling the world. So based on this assumption, let's start with something that actually preoccupies us a lot, and that is the body, the corporeal as it is, and how it goes with this whole definition of waste. For example, this is our body. It's God given, it's a product of nature, however inclined you are. The body and its outpourings and the fluids are always something that has to be abhorred. That's the way we have been kind of, brought up. So from the bodily excretions to the pus, the blood, the vomit, snot, everything is something that we kind of abhor. But you don't know, right? These are the things that keep the body clean. They remove the toxins from the body. But as I said, paradoxically, the very things that clean our body are also seen as the unclean. That's the parody of, I'm sorry, that's the paradox of it. I'll quote one of the earliest examples from literature. We have Sophocles, and we have read or we have come across a lot of his works, plays. One of them is called Philoctetes. Very interesting play. The hero, of course, is Philoctetes. Now, Philoctetes is supposed to be a part of the Trojan War. He should have fought for the Greeks. But unfortunately, what happens is, by the time the army is, garrisoned, and by the time they set sail, he's bitten by a snake. And the wound is not properly treated. So it starts festering, and pus oozes out of that wound. He's bitten on his foot. I mean. And that pus and the wound, the inflicted wound, it becomes, it emanates a foul smell, and everyone kind of, excommunicate him, because whenever he comes near, the smell is too foul. The stench is overpowering. So they do not want him with them. So he's thrown away. He becomes an outcast. He's not a part of the Trojan War. They set sail, and 14 years later, when Ulysses assumes command, Odysseus, when he assumes command, he remembers a prophecy that states that the Greeks can win the Trojan War only if the one whom they had shunned is brought back into the fold. So who should that be? It should be our hero, the protagonist. So immediately he sends a messenger to Philoctetes, and he is besieged to come back, but he refuses. He says, how is this possible? You guys are the ones who threw me out. Sophocles actually creates a character who is a form of ridicule, and then he becomes, a kind of a pitiable personage because of his body. So the body as waste has always been an archetypal theme in literature. The dead body, and the process of the dead body becoming rotten has been a site of objection. It's both something that creates fascination and at the same time it creates a kind of a repulsion, an abhorrence. And the dead body has always been a site of contestation when it comes to literature. For example, Pope Innocent III was also a writer of tracts. When he talks about the dead body, he says that the dead body should always be kept at bay. It should never be neared, it should never be touched. In fact, he also says that it should never be even seen. Because any kind of a sensory perception with the body can lead to disease or contagion, as he puts it. Now, he didn't mean this only about the plague body, a body, a dead body, a corpse that has been riddled with plague. He meant any body that had even come out of natural death. In fact, even the Bible has so many references to the shunning of bodily fluids or body as waste. And you must have come across so much of references to this in literature. For example, in Gulliver's Travels, in the very first voyage, Lilliput, you should remember how he puts out the fire, right, in the castle by voiding on it, right, by urinating. Now, the irony is, it was written during the age of enlightenment. So for those people of the age, it was a matter of fun. But the fun is is abjection. You understand? There is an abhorrence and as well as a fascination with it. From Gulliver's Travels to, let's say, I mentioned this briefly, Saramago's blindness. The kind of disorder that you find in society that comes with, this infliction of blindness. And, when society plunges into chaos, the way Saramago presents that chaos is via media, the filth that accumulates in the house. Now, when I use the word filth here, I'm talking about the bodily waste. Again, a matter of objection. Now, we know that Saramago is a Nobel Prize winning writer. I'm talking about another Nobel Prize winning writer now, the Austrian playwright and novelist, Elfriede Jelinek. In many of her plays, you will find that there are so many scatological elements referring to excrement and filth. It's almost as if she's saying that, it's an invariable part of life. Now, this from Austria, which is considered to be one of the most clean countries in the world. I do not have to even mention our country, because whenever India is represented in literature, especially the literature that is Western oriented or, written for the reading of the Westerners, the Europeans or the Americans, you'll always find the fascination which these writers have for, the Indian non-sensibility for filth. Be it Arvind Adiga, V.S. Naipaul, who in his return to India, he says that, the first thing he basically saw when he reached Mumbai or, Bombay, erstwhile Bombay or India, basically, is lines and lines of people squatting on the streets. I'm of course using a euphemism for it. Or, Vikas Swarup's Slumdog Millionaire. When Danny Boyle adapted it to movie, an Oscar-winning movie, you remember that infamous scene, right? The dive of that young boy and his successful, return in filth. So I hope you understand the context that I am trying to create out here. So this is India, but that is Austria. Even there, I think probably she had the audacity and the brazenness to say that yes, filth is a part of life. Or Gargantua, from whom that term Gargantuan comes, Rabelais' masterpiece. Every aspect of human bodily waste is described in detail. Should be one of the world's first, naturalist texts. Should be. But it's more of a parody. It's more of a farce. So maybe you might not take it very seriously. But these are elements which we need to read probably in a more contemplative mode, not just in a very humorous. And on the other side, you have someone like Baudelaire, or most of these French symbolist poets, of whom I'm using Baudelaire as an example, who are fascinated by this. That's why I keep using that term objection, because there is always a fascination and always an abhorrence. So this profound objection you find in one of Baudelaire's great poems, from Flus du Mal, of course, Flowers of Evil. The name of the poem was The Carcass. You have Baudelaire wandering into the forest, and in the forest, he comes across a corpse. Now, this is not a corpse of an animal, it's a corpse of a young woman. It's a rotting corpse. Now, normally, we would be disgusted by any kind of carcass, especially a human one. But this particular persona is fascinated by it. I'm not going to describe this in intricate detail because I do not want to create any kind of a nausea among you. And I don't want you people to hate me also, because it's a very touchy subject, a very filthy subject, a very disgusting subject, probably. So he describes the corpse in very minuscule detail. He does the various stages of disintegration of a corpse. Now, a normal erotic poem focusing on a woman's body would focus on certain parts of the body, and these parts would be kind of described in a very aesthetic sense to kind of project the beauty of that body. But here, he uses reverse aesthetics because he uses the same parts, but in a more rotting, disintegrating type of way. And that, he says, is a kind of aesthetics in itself. That's why I called it a reverse aesthetics. He calls that as an aesthetics in itself. So it's not that, people created only as a sense of a macabre, or, something that creeps you out, or something that disgusts you. This feeling of revulsion is kind of reversed in writers like Baudelaire also. And if you have to look at it from a very non-narrative, non-imaginative sort of way, then of course we have to focus on Foucault, who I did find fault with in the beginning of my session, saying that he never wrote about the history of waste. But in one sense, in one of his books, that is Discipline and Punish, he looks at the body itself as trash, the body itself as waste, when he says that the kind of punishment that is inflicted on the body becomes symbolic of the trashness of the body. For example, one of the earliest punishments that was given for regicide or an attempted regicide is that, the person who attempts that is half killed, first by disembowelment, and then by burning, and then the half dead body is dragged by horses, and then it is quartered by horses, and then it is cut into pieces. Now, there are 4 stages of punishment, and horrific, of course, but the punishment also goes after the soul leaves the body. Even when the body is lifeless, the punishment continues because that is considered to be the ultimate insult, the ultimate punishment in a sense. So the soul goes, but the body remains. So that is what we call corporeal punishment, right? So the body remains, and the body is also given, it becomes a site of punishment. I don't know how we are going to reason this out or how we are going to explain this. Not by saying that, the human mind works in mysterious ways. No, the human mind actually works in very morbid ways, especially when we talk about the concept of waste. So you see, the body as waste, human body as a site of contestation, when it is about, waste, it assumes so many different dimensions. So I was just trying to show you in how many different dimensions this kind of works. You know what landfill is, right? So I'm from that assumption, I'm moving over to this idea of the textual landfill. So the removal of dirt or mud from one part and dumped over to the other, and the creation of an artificial plateau is what we would call a landfill. Now, waste theorists consider that literature embodies something that they call is a textual landfill. So basically, the history of literature is a history of waste, not that historicity, but this narratives are a history of waste, and you use waste or filth in so many different ways, and to kind of project or manifest so many different attitudes and mentalities. For example, think about how in his Canterbury Tales, Chaucer plays with scatology. It's near pornographic when you consider the kind of humor that Chaucer indulges in. The choice of words, the description of the characters, and the description of their actions and their mental landscapes is highly scatological. And Shakespeare though celebrated the body, right? The pun, body and the body. You will find, is a cause celebre when it comes to Shakespeare. I think more than any other writer, it is Shakespeare who has dealt extensively with allusions, puns, innuendos, direct, indirect references, with every aspect of filth in all its dimensions. In fact, there are studies of especially Hamlet, wherein they say that in Hamlet, Shakespeare has created so many allusions to human waste. From the character of Ophelia becoming mad, hysterics, which many waste theorists say that, it is an indirect reference to her menstruation also. Remember, in those ages, the women's menstrual blood was considered to be something that was equivalent to the plague disease. Again, people from popes to the common layman have talked about. And we do know that, when it came to sexuality and gender, Shakespeare was no great hero. So even his most sublime tragedy has so many body elements to it. So it's a tragedy. Then what do I say about his comedies? If you have read Twelfth Night, for example, you would come across so many, instances of him using scatology. So many examples. Or what about, the early novelists like Fielding, who in his parodies like Shamela, or even in Tom Jones, has a lot of distasteful things to say about waste. Or someone like Defoe, who would probably see the white man as someone who is absolved from any kind of excrement or filth, but would rather, indict the non-white or the native as the person who causes filth. If you've read Robinson Crusoe, you will come across a lot of such instances where filth is generated by them and not by the whites. But actually, it's the other way around. It's the other way around because the natives know how to dispose of waste in a better way than the whites did. Again, history has not recorded this, but it has happened. Lawrence Stern and in Tristram Shandy, the kind of humor that he projects out of disgust, and someone like Dickens, the sociological novelist, who talks about industrialization and pollution by using the symbol of dust in many of his novels. So like Great Expectations, where you have that palatial mansion which is covered with cobwebs and dust. Right? To Little Nell, where the chimney sweepers always are covered in dust. So that dust, the metaphor of dust, waste, becomes the way Dickens kind of exposes the pollution that was prevalent in Victorian England, which I don't think anyone else did. For most of them, it was like, But when we come to the modern age, it becomes more prevalent. It becomes more of a foregrounding rather than, keeping this in the background. It becomes more of a foregrounding. So that is exactly where we locate the writers of naturalism. Emile Zola, for example, when you read his novels, especially Germinal, the very first chapter of Germinal has an extensive description of a man suffering from consumption, and because he works in the mines, and the kind of outpouring of phlegm which he has to necessarily do because he is suffering from consumption. So the cough and the spit is described in unflattering detail. It's exactly what Zola wanted to do. He wanted us to shudder. He wanted us to feel that disgust, because that's exactly what naturalism is about, to create that feeling of disgust. And from naturalism to maximalism, when we come to the magical realists, you will find that they enjoy the description of anything that is disgusting. In that sense, I think even of course they can never outdo someone like Rabelais or Swift for that matter, but they do indulge in that. The visceral descriptions of filth which the postmodernists bring out. Now, these are what the waste theorists would call textual landforms. The way literature or the text, they kind of fill those gaps, those lacunae, which are missing in real life, for us to obviously ponder over, to contemplate, to meditate over. Now, since we're talking about landfill, let me also go to another sort of literature. Now, this was a definition that was given by a German writer whose name is Heinrich Böll, who talks about the literature of rubble. And he actually defended the literature of rubble because there was a section of people who said that, why do you have to indulge in this? He said, no, it is necessary because it is a reminder of what humans are capable of. Now, what exactly does he mean by the literature of rubble? Very simple. When he uses that word literature of rubble, he is kind of accusing humanity of creating death and destruction through war. So, going back to the Greeks, going back to Homer, remember the Iliad is rubble literature, because there Homer is creating an image of a city being destroyed. Today they call it collateral damage. In the pursuit of war, cities have to be destroyed. And remember, we are seeing a war live right now. So whenever we mention war, it's not just human suffering, it's also another sort of suffering wherein buildings are being destroyed, monuments are being destroyed, and in this destruction, what is happening is rubbish is created, waste is created in the form of concrete discard, which is not going to be cleared out for a long time. Just remember how many decades it took for Berlin to find its footing once again, or any of those European countries which were destroyed by war, Kuwait, Iraq, I can go on. So this is what Heinrich Böll says that is rubble literature. So if on one end of the spectrum we have someone like Homer, I think we need to move to the other end of the spectrum where you have Neruda, who talks about the ruins of Machu Picchu. And he says Machu Picchu is a revenant of, obviously, colonialism, the conquistadors. He calls it a disjecta membra of history. Have you read Derek Walcott's Ruins of a Great House? You will understand what we mean by disjecta membra, because it is a remembrance, it's a remnant of something horrible that has happened. Go around India and you will find a lot of such hangovers of our colonial past. I think most of us would like to kind of erase that and probably, build something in its place, in its wake, maybe some kind of ground zero, a symbolic ground zero. But I don't think that is the right perspective to be taken, because sometimes we need to be reminded of, the colonial past. It's not a colonial hangover. It's what, Homi Bhabha would call a post-colonial remember. We need to have that. Or coming down to the 21st century, the age of pollution, and pollution laying waste to an entire region. and you have the literature of the new apocalyptics, like Cormac McCarthy, who are presenting to us a post-apocalyptic world of voidness. Remember when we tried to define waste, we said that one of the attributes of waste is the complete void, complete desolation. So he creates that kind of a waste of rubbish where there is nothing. You should also read Stephen King's The Stand. It has also been made into a mini series. I don't think it's available on any of the OTT platforms which are currently here in India. But you can always download and watch it. You should watch it because Stephen King creates the entire world, a post-apocalyptic world, which is completely in waste. And what are the repercussions of that? That is something that he creates. Since we are talking about waste, we also need to talk about fecopoetics, or the poetics of fecal matter. I know it's not something that we would like to discuss, but again, it's out there. It's right outside. Though we try to turn a blind eye, it's right out there. It's a huge problem. So again, we talk about, the concept of objection. It's something which you would not like to see, but it's right there. And believe me or not, the entire aspect of ecopoetics you would find abundantly in children's literature. I don't know how. It's something that is, I wouldn't say fascinating, but it's something that is definitely mystifying. How is that in children's literature, this catalogical element is given so much of importance? When you read your fairy tales, you will find that, there is so much of, the input of ecopoetics, which you find. We know that, Gulliver's Travels was bowdlerized and kind of adapted to children's literature, but the original text is not something that can be read by children. That's what we say. But look at someone like Roald Dahl. It's considered to be a children's writer, who has created masterpieces of children's literature. But in one of his novels, again, a very popular novel that is BFG, I'm sorry, there's a typo mistake there. It's Big Friendly Giant, right? BFG. Again, the movie was made. And in the BFG, Roald Dahl talks about the wisp poppers. I'm not going to tell you what exactly the wisp popper is, but it's something which we would, not discuss in public because we consider that to be very despicable. He brings that out in children's literature, and that is seen as an element of fun. It's seen as an element of humor. So scatology and humor always go hand in hand. And though we consider the Germans to be very humorless and very robotic, I'm sorry for indulging in this kind of covert racism, but that's how the world looks at the Germans. But many of these fairy tales have come to us from Germany. So you have Grimm's fairy tales, which are the standard when it comes to fairy tales, right? Most of the fairy tales come from Grimm's, who have basically just collected from ancient folklore and passed it over the generations. So there is one. This is not Grimm's, but this is another set of children's tales, which is called Till Eulenspiegel. Till Eulenspiegel is a character. Have you read Tinkle? And in Tinkle, you used to have Tinkle, I believe, is no longer available. You just have the old ones. So it's in Tinkle used to have a character called Supandi, which again was very racist. But when we were children, probably, we would not have minded this. So, the simpleton, Chupandi was a simpleton. So we have Till Eulenspiegel, who is a simpleton, but in the German context, and just like, Chupandi and his master, uh, Eulenspiegel has a master who tells him something, and this guy assumes something else, and in that assumption, he goes and does something which is absolutely disgusting, absolutely nauseating. But in that, Eulenspiegel will kind of, come out with an aphorism, which probably is a kind of a knowledge gain. Again, I cannot be telling you the story. Please do go read it up, Google it out, and you'll understand how exactly scatological that is going to be. So, Ficopoetics is not a subject of fascination, maybe. It might be disgusting, but I think it's something that, as I said, is out there, right outside your doors. So what are you going to do about it? Remember, it's basically our fault. So what are you going to do about it? So, these kind of narratives are kind of inspiring us, maybe, or forcing us, maybe, to kind of look beyond our walls and see the filth and the disgust that is right there, and probably do something. It's not just about seeing, it's about doing something. Which brings us to another very pertinent issue. What about the new ways that we are creating? So technology and technological waste. That's something I think is, again, something which is alarming, something we should, as rational people, think about, because we are creating tons and tons of waste every day. Remember those old games like Road Rash, or even those multimedia games like Donkey Kong, or Super Mario Brothers. You remember you used to have those modules which we used to play with. I had a contraption in which there was Donkey Kong. You open that video game and Nintendo's, and you play, close it, keep it. It needed 2 batteries, and that batteries used to be replaced. And that replacement was pretty rapid. And then one fine day we grew out of it, I grew out of it, and I threw it away and probably went for something else. How many batteries, how many consoles, I do not know. But at that time, we had no understanding of how these batteries are going to pollute the landscape, or how this plastic is going to. So it was a basic confluence of technology and plastic. And today we have all these contraptions which are with us. I have my laptop, I have my mobile phone in front, I have a watch. And, as I said, there are so many different contraptions which are electronic, and they're going to last for 3 years max. And then they are going to be exchanged, maybe, or just thrown away. As such, we have dumped so much into our, poor earth. How much more? So that's exactly the idea of this virtual polluter. I'm using it in very Baudrillardian terms, because again, It's right there, right in front of us, right in front of our eyes. But this visibility that we have very naturally makes something very, very invisible. That is, this is going to be discarded, and you're going to conveniently pass it over to someone, and then it's out of your sight, out of your mind. Just imagine how many laptops you have had till date. How many more you're going to have? I mean, most of you are young, I guess. We have students here. Uh, so how many more laptops? How many more mobile phones? How many more earphones, headphones, and whatnot? How many batteries? Now, that is something, right? We were talking about these natural ways in some way or the other. But now we are talking about non-natural ways, which are never going to mix with the soil, right? Biodegradable versus non-biodegradable. So if you consider yourself as technology whizzes, technology savvy, cyberpunks, please do consider this also. See, so cyberpunk literature and later literatures, SF fiction, science fiction, SF literature, it's also looking at that. For example, you have a mainstream writer like Dom DeLillo. His magnum opus White Noise, which basically is looking at the concept of the pollutant as a chemical spill. We have, so many different zombie movies, or, the zombie manifestos, Holocaust. Again, apocalyptic basically, but try to understand that most of these zombie scares that we have in the movie, or, in the media, it always arises out of bad science or bad experimentation. All of us are dead. The current, trending on Netflix, which is a Korean zombie apocalypse movie, starts from there. I mean, you take you take your pick of zombie movies, you'll always find that, there'll always be that, a chemical waste, or, a mad scientist, or, a medicine that has become bad, or processed meat that has become bad. Corona, basically the scare of Corona always has biological warfare behind it, right? So these are the new creations when it comes to waste and discard studies and discard literature. There's something which we need to understand, focus on, is when we talk about the concept of information overdrive, we should also talk about how the digitalization of this information is also going overdrive. So you talk about, memory space in your system, and we always go for, large memory spaces, or you go for virtual clouds, right? And just imagine how much of those is stuff, you're basically holding all your stuff. You're basically holding all your documents, your photos out there in the blue nowhere. It's there. They call it the cloud, right? And because you have the cloud, you basically are just hoarding. There was a time when hoarding was done in houses. So you talk about clutterbugs who would have all this at home. We have heard, news about people dying because whatever they had cluttered, whatever they hoarded, that fell on them, and they were, kind of submerged in rubbish. But today we are talking about virtual rubbish. So I think that should be the realm of creative writing today, because we need to look at how virtual rubbish, Again, it's there, but you don't see it. It's again invisible. But just imagine how many, you remember you used to have something called hard disks once. So these hard disks, they grew from 100 GB to, then they talked about TB. So there was a time when Seagate had a 500 GB hard disk, and it was huge. And then they came up with 1 TB, and I don't know. Today, I don't know how many TBs, or is there anything beyond that TB is something that I have lost touch with. But what happened to all those hard disks? What happened to all your pen drives? You don't need them today. So you discarded them. So you discarded the floppy disk, you discarded the CD, you discarded these pen drives, you discarded the hard disks, external hard disk drives, and you went over for the cloud today, right? The virtual storage spaces. All those were discarded. All those are waste. And this, you are kind of, consoling yourself because it's not plastic. It's not real. It's real. That's also a kind of a garbage. That's also a kind of a clutter. In fact, it's bigger clutter because you do not have to delete anything now. Send it to the cloud. Dear friends, it's going to create a problem. It's going to be there. The problem would always be created in some way or the other. We just have to wait and watch how this problem is created. Now, let me just finish with a few points. I know we would always like to absolve ourselves from all this because we would always very conveniently say, it's not my problem, or it's not my fault. But every entity is an actor. The blame falls on every one of us. Every one of us creates this rubbish. And we create rubbish in excess. Just remember that. We talk about, digital footprints, and we talk about carbon footprints, right? And we are talking about negative carbon footprints. So, there are certain countries, like, for example, our neighboring country, Bhutan, which is supposed to be negative in that sense because they don't pollute much. It's all about being much or less, right? So yeah, true. I've seen it with my own eyes. They do not pollute much. Even smoking is banned in Bhutan. So for us, basically, smoking is banned in public, and I don't know whether we even follow that rule. In Bhutan, it's okay. Some people say that it's a monarchy. And monarchy is tyranny. So therefore, it's very easy to pass a law and abide by that law. People are fearful of the king. Okay, let's not go into that kind of discussions here. But we are a democracy, right? So the onus falls on us, and if we fail, I do not know whether it's a failure of democracy as such, or is it a failure of us as human beings. So yeah, I just something that I was looking at today. We have this canteen, and in canteen they generally, students are served vadas and tea. Sorry, and these vadas are given in that small, it's our culture, right? You tear off the newspapers and place the vada on that, and you just squeeze the oil out and you eat the vada. Fine. We're not talking about the health concepts here, but what happens to that paper? I think most of our students, sorry if I'm being very generalizing over here, but most of the students They eat that paper and they are not even ready to put it into the garbage. There's a bin, right? They're not even ready to do that. Of course, using paper, so much of paper itself is a sin. But throwing that, into the bushes, into the trees, into the mud or the soil, I'm just trying to look at how bigger a sin it is. So, my dear friends, the moving finger points at us. And please remember that we are at 11:59 in the doomsday clock. And the acceleration which is happening because of us is becoming rapider and rapider. It's accelerating very fast. So waste is no longer it's not a passive subject, it's an actant too. The acceleration of our production of waste is actually making it accumulate more and more and more. And it has become an actant because I think probably we have reached a stage probably of no return. How many rules, how many notice boards, how many do we put up? It's like, there is a sign saying that please do not urinate here, and, people would. For them, it's an act of rebellion. Maybe they just simply don't bother. I think we should bother. It's no longer, the waste of the other. It's ours. So we have created this Frankensteinian monster. You remember those famous words of Victor Frankenstein when the monster comes alive and he says, "It's alive." My dear friends, it's alive. It's alive and kicking. So, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to act decisively? I think that is the question that waste theory asks us. It has no satisfactory answers because the answers have to be provided by us. So, as any theory, it keeps the subject matter alive and kicking. It offers to you in a platter, and you are supposed to partake of it intellectually. So that is the onus of waste theory. If you're interested, you can do a lot of research on it, because I think there's not much of a research that has been done on that, especially in the Indian context. So maybe a very good resource material is this particular book. And I personally have read this book, and I've echoed a lot of ideas from this book for your basic understanding. So I acknowledge my profound inspiration for waste theory to this academician whose name is Susan Signay Morrison, and her monumental book that is called The Literature of Waste. So please read it if you're interested. Even if you're not interested, I think it's in a sense, it's our project. We need to move. So yes, that's it. Thank you for your patient listening, because I think I have overshot my time. Hopefully it was not a waste of your time. Hopefully it was informational, and hopefully it was helpful for you. So I'm ready to take any questions, and I would try to answer them as much to your satisfaction. Obviously, there is this question by Harini, I guess, who asked me, in the concept of body as waste, is it applicable to Kafka's Metamorphosis? Yes. Yes. The existentialists were very much concerned about the concept of body as waste. And I think Kafka, through the creation of Gregor Samsa, I believe, he kind of exemplified that. So yes, definitely. Sir, can you please elaborate on application of theory of waste in depopulation relation dystopian science fiction? Okay. Now, how do I answer this question, or what exactly is your question? Are you talking about overpopulation itself as a waste and dystopian science fiction offering a kind of a solution to that? Like, for example, when W.H. Wyndham, when he came up with, his horror science fiction, The Day of the Triffids, for example, he had a bone to grind because he had this feeling that, the humans were kind of destroying the world by overpopulation. So overpopulation, he found, was a direct result of overpopulation. So yeah, so he was kind of, very scathing of human society for that. So he came up with this idea that, when we talk about, consumption on natural consumption of the humans, why not we reverse it? And, he talked about how nature consumes those humans. So he created those triffids, basically, which were monster plants. So if that is an example, I think probably yes. So, even something like a human destruction science fiction movie, like, Planet of the Apes, or, all those subsequent sequels that came. I think yes. I'm not sure who asked me this question, but yes, definitely yes. Can Bakhtinian idea of grotesque body be used in waste theory as a form of abjection or uncanny? Yes, definitely. The grotesque, according to Bakhtin, was a site of contestation because he felt that the idea of, or the semblance of the normal, which people always associated with humanity, he found that it was kind of absurd. So he comes up with the idea of the grotesque. So yes, but I'm not sure whether this word uncanny can be used here properly, because what kind of uncanny are we talking about? The Freudian uncanny? In that case, no. But abjection, yes. In a more Christevian way. Objection in the sense of, how Christeva looked at the idea of the doubling of horror and fascination. So yes, definitely yes. Okay. Okay. Okay, I'm not sure how I'm going to answer this question. If there are any other questions, please.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Thank you. This is Shobana.
Hello, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for your time. Hope you enjoyed the exercise. Enjoyed.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you for those wonderful words.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir, for your reflections on the idea of waste, crip, and horror as read into literature. It was really exciting to listen to all those ideas from you. I enjoyed it terribly.
Hopefully, the other participants also.
Thank you very much for your time. Okay, enjoy the exercise. Enjoy.
Thank you so much. Thank you for those wonderful words.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir, for your reflections on the idea of waste, crip, and horror as read into literature. It was really exciting.
Yes, ma'am. It was exciting for me too. Thank you.
Thanks so much for your time on the 2 days you spent with us. No, we would listen to you any length of time, and we didn't bother ending it by 6. We are only bothered about starting it in time. Somehow it got delayed on both the days. Big sorry to the participants. We couldn't get started in time on 2 days, but today I think we were in time. And Department of English, Bishop Heber College is of the habit of letting the speakers go on and on. You must, I think, whenever we throw open our floor, online, offline, for the participants of other colleges and universities, please understand that we don't mind the time to end. So you have to be prepared for that. And so any length of time, knowledge is welcome. And since listening to a very comprehensive account of such reflections, which for me are all new, because I am by and large a very conventional reader of literature, was very exciting, and any length of time is fine and perfectly okay. And we would rather want the lectures to be lengthy. I know it's because of having to answer, or rather owing to today's psychology of listening and attention span and things like that. We have put it as 1 hour, but we don't mind making it even 1.5 hours. And I still remember we are sitting in the same hall, Jinnah sir, where you had a lecture with our PG students on deconstruction. It went on for over 2 hours, I remember.
Oh my God.
So,
okay. I hope the students do not find fault with me today.
No, not today. I mean, in the sense, no, maybe you're saying that's because of today's mindset. Maybe they recall that and they find fault with nothing of that sort. Even that day, if you remember, they never minded the session going on like that, and they wanted it to go on, and it was an interactive session. If you remember, you were being very conversational with them, trying to get them into the understanding of the concepts of deconstruction. And so neither the department nor the students mind the sessions being over an hour or even 2 hours. So this is especially for the participants, and you'll have to comply with this kind of a system. And thank you, participants, for enjoying the session. And we are taken up with a kind of overwhelming response. And I know it's all because of the kind of topics and the people who reflect on the topics. So I thank you so much, sir, for the time and your efforts, Dr. Jinnah.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for your
looking forward to meeting you soon,
offline,
yes, more such lectures.
Sure, ma'am.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, participants. Bye-bye.
Once again, I would like to thank our distinguished speaker, Dr. Abdul Muhammad Ali Jinnah, for imparting knowledge on waste theory. We would like to express our deep gratitude to the principal for his excellent support to convene this program. And dear participants, you may send papers pertaining to this theme of the FTP to litexplorer66@gmail.com. The selected papers will be published in our Literary Explorer or in-house journal.
Yeah, there's a call for papers, dear participants. We are running a departmental journal. We've been running it for over 20 years now, from 1990. we've been running Literary Explorer. It's an ISSN registered journal. It has a jury team. Of course, papers that you send will be subject to scrutiny. And so it will be sent back to you if at all the papers need to be revised on various aspects, and the same way as the other journals do. And so this is for information. You are expected to send your papers based on the themes of the FDP. Themes of the FDP. That's very particular. We are particular about that. And so you're most welcome to send your papers, running to about 3,000 words. And it's an ISSN registered and adhere to the 8th edition of MLA guidelines. And the email ID is litexplorer66@gmail.com. And we'll type it out in the chat box soon. It's been done already. Thank you.
Kindly copy and keep the feedback link as soon as it is posted. And we request you to refrain from calling the organizers at odd times.
Yeah, please refrain from calling the organizers at odd times. Enough and more information are put there in the chat box. The email ID of the journal. Please refrain from calling the organizers, and the feedback link is there. And I think that's fine. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, participants, for your questions, mind-enticing questions, and good night. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you.